When 14-year-old James was denied a spot on his school's basketball team, he didn't yet know that this act of injustice was just the beginning of his fight against racism. His dream of becoming a champion was met with an obstacle: systemic discrimination, and the coach running the team didn't even look at him. Years later, after becoming an Olympic hero, James returned home with a gold medal. But the face of the man who once rejected him was full of embarrassment and surprise. What happened next would shock even the most experienced. But let's start from the very beginning. In a small town, the excitement for the new sports season was palpable. Anticipation for the school games filled the air, bringing the entire community together around the basketball court where new stars were born. James, a 14-year-old black boy, dreamed of being a part of that story. His love for basketball started in childhood, fueled by stories his father told him about great African-American athletes who became champions despite the obstacles. Each day, his dream grew, and James tirelessly practiced. Every shot, every jump was filled with a desire to prove he deserved a place on the school team. The day of the tryouts was approaching, and although James was nervous, he was determined to show everything he had. The court was filled with teenagers, each hoping to be chosen by Mr. Robertson, the strict but respected coach. But for James, this day would be the beginning of disappointment. When it was his turn to step onto the court, James's heart was racing. He waited for the chance to showcase his talent. However, Coach Robertson, without even looking at him, simply said, "We've already filled all the spots we need." These words hit him like lightning. James froze, not understanding why he wasn't given a chance to prove himself. Standing on the sidelines, watching the coach, James's mind swirled with questions. Why wasn't I picked? Am I not good enough? The longer he thought, the clearer it became that it wasn't about his skill. He remembered how the coach avoided eye contact and ignored him during practice. James realized his skin color was the barrier. This rejection was a heavy blow. James had believed that talent and hard work would be the deciding factors, but facing bias shattered his confidence. He felt bitterness and injustice. In the eyes of the townspeople, Robertson was a symbol of order and discipline, and no one questioned his decisions. But to James, he had become the embodiment of racism. Returning home, James was devastated. His dream, which had seemed so close, crumbled. He shut the door behind him and met his father's gaze. Marcus immediately understood what had happened. He, too, had faced injustice, and now saw in his son's eyes not just despair, but a hidden anger. When James came home, his heart was full of bitterness and disappointment. His dream seemed shattered, and he didn't know how to live with this injustice. His father, Marcus, looked at him closely, feeling a familiar pain. As a former Olympic champion, Marcus had also faced prejudice and discrimination in both sports and life. He knew James needed not just support, but something more to overcome his pain. They sat at the table, and Marcus began to speak. "You know, I was once in your shoes." Calmly, he shared how people had told him he wouldn't achieve what others had. "They'll always try to break us, but it's our job to prove them wrong through our actions." These words struck a chord with James. His father shared stories of both victories and defeats, showing him that even when it feels like the world is against you, you must keep fighting. James listened, and slowly, new strength began to awaken inside him. His anger and disappointment started to shift into determination. The next day, Marcus enrolled James in an independent basketball academy, where the coaches judged players solely on their skills. Here, James rediscovered his faith in himself. Every day at practice, he gave his all, fighting not just for a place in the sport, but for the right to be acknowledged. The academy became a place where he was valued for his talent, not his appearance. Meanwhile, life in town went on as usual. Coach Robertson continued to recruit only white players for his team. No one saw a problem with this, except James. He realized that this injustice went deeper than just his rejection. It was a manifestation of systemic racism. But James didn't give up. Despite the school team's rejection, he kept training hard. His days were filled with self-improvement. His family became his pillar of support. His mother always found the right words to lift him when doubts crept back in. His younger sister, though small, was his biggest fan, inspiring him to push further. His father was not only a mentor in sports, but in life. Every evening, they discussed not just basketball, but also the strategy of winning. Marcus shared his knowledge and experience, helping his son grow stronger, both physically and mentally. He taught James that success comes to those who endure and overcome hardships. James absorbed these lessons, growing more confident with each passing day. Though his path was tough, James knew he wasn't alone. The support of his family and his belief in himself became his foundation, helping him overcome any obstacles on his journey to success. Several years passed, and through perseverance and hard work, James achieved what he once could only dream of. At 17, he was invited to join the national youth team. This caused a buzz in his hometown. Those who once doubted his talent now acknowledged that James was a rising star. News of his success spread quickly. Newspapers and television told the story of his journey from being unfairly rejected to becoming an international athlete. James had always worked tirelessly, never giving in to challenges. He remembered how his dream was almost shattered by the wall of racism, but each day he turned rejection into motivation. The academy became his second family, where he developed his skills and belief in himself. The support of his family and mentors strengthened him as both a person and a player. Back in his hometown, he quickly became a symbol of overcoming adversity. His success inspired young athletes, especially those facing discrimination. James proved that resilience and effort can break down any barriers. Black athletes, once afraid of prejudice, now saw in him a hero who had overcome the system. Despite his achievements, Coach Robertson continued to ignore James's success. Even when James's name appeared in the papers and on TV, Robertson remained silent. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit that he had underestimated the player, solely because of his skin color. Robertson continued coaching his team, refusing to acknowledge James's accomplishments. But for James, that no longer mattered. He no longer sought validation from people like Robertson. His success spoke for itself. When James was invited to the Olympics, his name became known across the country. This was an incredible achievement, and even those who had once mocked his dreams were now forced to recognize his triumph. The town held a grand celebration in his honor, and the very people who once turned away were now cheering him on. However, despite the widespread admiration, Robertson remained unmoved by James's success, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge that James had proven his strength and talent. At the Olympics, James achieved what he had dreamed of his entire life. He won a gold medal and became a national hero. His victory was not just a sporting triumph, but a symbol of overcoming prejudice, proof that persistence can break down any barriers. When the medal was placed around his neck, James felt not only pride, but also a sense of victory over those who had doubted him. Upon returning home, his hometown welcomed him with a hero's celebration. On the main square, a grand event was held, where residents, friends, coaches, and even those who had once doubted him gathered. The stage was decorated with banners bearing his image, and when James stepped onto the platform, he saw the enthusiastic applause of the crowd. But one face immediately caught his attention. Coach Robertson, his school coach who had denied him a spot on the team. Robertson sat in the front row, his face showing a mix of surprise and embarrassment. James realized that this moment was important not just for him, but for their entire story. He looked at the coach who had once dismissed him and understood that his success was not just a personal victory, but also a breakdown of the biases that had surrounded him for years. In his speech, James thanked everyone who had supported him along the way, but he saved special words for those who had once doubted him. "Thank you to everyone who believed in me," he said, "but especially to those who didn't. You gave me the strength to become who I am." These words had a profound impact on the crowd. People realized that the injustice James had faced had given him the inner strength to achieve success. The crowd erupted in applause, and on Robertson's face, there was a clear realization of his mistake. After the event, Robertson approached James. There was no trace of the former arrogance in his eyes. He extended his hand and, shaking James's hand, said, "I was wrong about you, James. You've proven that perseverance is stronger than prejudice." These words, which James had never dared to hope for, were sincere. In that moment, James felt the pain he had carried for years begin to fade. This was not just reconciliation, but an acknowledgement that he had won the most important battle against systemic discrimination. James's victory was not just a personal triumph, but a lesson for the entire town. The story of a boy who had been rejected because of his skin color ended with him becoming an Olympic champion and changing the mindset of an entire community. People understood that talent has no color, and society can change if one believes in justice and equality. This story forever changed their small town, becoming a symbol of how self-belief and determination can overcome prejudice.